Hi there, Christian Henson here. I've been told that I need to say that at the beginning of videos for new people who are visiting for the first time. If you are new to this channel, you definitely need to go to this video linked above and watch that. Now, sometimes when these videos are embedded on like forums and stuff like that, that thing doesn't appear. So look at the video description down below. This is an accompaniment to a fly on the wall thing I did, which was recorded well over a year ago for a series called Inside No9. Now, the comments beneath that video have been just absolutely brilliant. Some great questions. And as promised, I was going to do a part 2 a little later than I'd thought, but there's been a few distractions of late. I think it's also kind of pertinent to be talking about Inside No9 because it's just been, I got a call about 2 weeks ago, put on hiatus midway through recording the first episode of the next season. What I thought I'd do is simply pick up where we left off with the session, fly on the wall session of me really giving, particularly the first violinist Max, some very challenging and ambitious music to play, how I then remixed it in with the samples and what samples are cut and what samples I kept. Maybe just go back in time a bit and revisit the whole of this project and how I approached it. Let's get cracking. I think it's probably worth looking at my project folder. This was all done entirely in Logic. I believe I mixed it remotely, so I wasn't able to mix it in Pro Tools, nor indeed did I manage to create a Pro Tools file for the dub to handle. So I just sent them 3 stems there and a full mix. But let's just have a look inside. So we've got our split tracks, which is the movie on one side, the temp score on the other side, dialogue. They do tend to temp with my music from other shows, which I don't know if you agree, but I find that more difficult because my fingers already know that and I want to get away from the temp, even if I'll allow myself to copy myself from time to time. You'll see down here the full-on Logic files that I used. And if you didn't watch the video, which this is accompanying, and to repeat myself, basically what I do in order to save huge amounts of time on these series, because I have about a week to produce the scores, so that's spotting it to delivering it, including all of the using musicians, the orchestration, all that kind of stuff. So you can see here just a fixed tempo 110, and I basically the only things that change are the meter numbers so that people are playing on the ones 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. It's probably about 12, 13 cues, which I've organized on the page as a series of sections that we attach. And you've got these big, someone was asking, how do you expect people to kind of count all of these bars? I don't. We just jump to L. So the sample instruments that I've used are largely stuff like Tundra, which is a really big quiet sounding library, chamber strings, and I've got some Evos, which are really useful. I've also use some stuff from Uist, which is someone was asking me about how do you do those kind of strange articulations, which are kind of aleatoric. Well, we've got libraries that have that stuff in, and then often the orchestrator will simply listen to what I've demoed with. But the main body of stuff was using alternative solo strings, which are slightly bohemian, and by that I mean not straight down the middle traditional classical playing styles, slightly more on the edge, not folky, but just slightly edgier, more characterful. I used those to demonstrate to the producers what the net end result was going to be. And when I laid down the playback stems, I laid down Max's, who's the first violinist who had the most difficult parts to play, really, really difficult sight read, ROB, rest of band, and then playback. The idea being that I would usually mute these out on playback, and this is the accompanying samples, percussion, stuff like that, which they play to, and we kind of gauge their performances too. That's how we get the dynamics right. The engineer initially kind of gets up a mix that he's happy with. He'll be concentrating largely on what he's recording in the room, and there'll be a point I usually go, Nick, can I now turn the samples up so I can make sure that the dynamics are correct to match those? You'll see there's a MIDI file there. That's to help them create the Pro Tools session. What the MIDI file will contain is the tempo and also all of these meter changes. So the Pro Tools bar count matches the Logic bar count, matches the score. On preparing the session for Ben, let me just save this, I simply stripped out all of the materials I don't want him to orchestrate. So that's a little rule that we've come up with If it's in his session, I want it orchestrating. So let's just have a quick look at that. So you'll see that that is much more digestible for an orchestrator. So it'll be this very specific parts that are done with alternative solo strings. So first, and it was just one of each, second, viola, cello, contrabass. And then there'll be some ones that are kind of ensembles, which I play with both hands, and I'll give him that with some choices of how we work the divisi, which isn't possible in this case because there's only one person per section, nor indeed whether people are playing double stops, all of that kind of stuff. You'll also notice that if I lasso everything, you'll see that these are all completely clear. There's no modifiers on, no transpose buttons, and that is what I tend to do before sending is within Logic. It's called normalizing, which is confusing because it doesn't mean the same as normalize in an audio sense, but basically I've got a hotkey for that. It's Control N, and that basically fixes or flattens all the modifiers. So if I've gone up a third, which I do often, and I just do that by going transpose up a third, it'll flatten everything down, so the MIDI is absolute. The other thing I also do is remove all of the instruments so that Ben doesn't get a ton of missing samples, don't have this instrument, you're not authorized on all of that kind of stuff. Again, these are born of usually sending Ben lots and lots and lots of cues, and these really add up, him having to normalize, or rather we're on the scoring stage and particularly maybe a tonal passage, I suddenly go, that's out by a minor third. So it just saves us time all along the way. And then the final thing that I prepared for Ben is some notes. And it might be interesting to go through some of these. So I generally open up with a generalized notes, not too waffly, not too much information. This is defo one of those grab what is important to grab that samples can't do very well ones. So namely, these lead violins, these lyrical parts. I don't worry too much about grabbing interesting pizzicato parts. Samples do pizzicatos and bass notes really well. So the first bit of music, this is a demonstration of really featuring the first violin. I can't bow in twos on samples. What I mean by that is it's not da 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 da, and it's not da 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 da. It's da ya da ya da ya da ya da. It's really difficult to reproduce on samples, particularly if you don't have much time. But I really want it phrased so that it isn't staccato, scratchy, so bowing in twos as a general note, or more elegantly where you see fit, but defo, not staccato, joined up writing and everything. So you see I've color-coded the ones that I've actually muted. So these are, I don't want the soloist to play on top of samples, they are replacing them. And I think a great example of that is the beginning here. So let's have a listen. I'm going to mute out the recordings and see what I did here. What's great about this being season 5 is that there is a trust between myself and the filmmakers, whereby I can simply go, this will sound rubbish on samples, but it's going to sound great when we get a genius violinist to play it. So this is what I presented to them. See, I've absolutely buried it so that I'm not really drawing attention to it for the program makers. And you'll see here are the 2 signals I got back from Nick. I don't have time to delve into all of the different mics and stuff. He can mix it. He can make it sound as one. I'll trust him on that. He'll send me the multi-tracks, and if I want to dig anything out, which I didn't and very rarely do, and basically I just said I just want a separate mix of Macs. So this will be the room mics and the close mics for the seconds through to Leon on bass. Max's close mic is just on a separate track, and you can see already I balanced these differently. So let's just mute that sample. Absolutely excellent. And again, that real bohemian feel. 147, whilst the section should be quiet, also shouldn't be too nice. So the violin bowing in twos, poco pont, so it's a little bit on the bridge, that bright, scratchy sound. And the flautando part should slide slightly between the notes. The cello could be ugly here too. From after this cue, I hope it sounds more self-explanatory. Return the violin to playing non-pont through for its soloist stuff. And that's when Max and I really established a kind of lingua franca barto, which means that we'll play with a kind of a robbing spirit, kind of speeding up, slowing down, that kind of stuff. So let's have a listen to this next bit, 147. So let's hear this section without the real players first, and then what difference they made. I'm now hearing, in retrospect, that actually the vibraphone is out of tune, and that's what was causing Mac's problems for these first couple of cues. Let's hear it with the live band. For me, it's almost emotional 3D. The samples, they get you quite of the way there, but it's like a processed image. It's like for me, it's what even a really good quality Tesco's finest pizza compared to, the kind of pizzas you'll get in Sicily. The ingredients are similar, but one has been put together in a factory or in a machine. The other's been put together passionately by a human being. It's great to return to this and hear the profound difference that musicians have on material like this. So 510, so we're jumping way forward. The violin should not sound like this. I'm hearing very long staccatos, or is it marcato? Anyway, just a bit of daylight between the notes with very soft attacks. I think consort, also predictive text there, consort 2. So again, let's just play this section as the producers heard it before we went into the studio. Okay, let's mute out what I didn't use, and let's pull the musicians back in. Double stopped note, so that's the viola player playing two notes at the same time, produces a lovely tone. And that's something that was a feature of this score, is encouraging these double stops, knowing that the physical nature of playing two notes at the same time affects the ability to play vibrato, and also the tuning usually is slightly less accurate. It's more of a reach, as they would call it. And I think behind dialogue, just hearing it for the first time with your ears not being drawn to a particular element of it, you're not hearing the two, the samples and the live players. But when you've been really focused in on it, you can hear the difference there. And again, it's the smoke and mirrors and the makeup and the grease paint of show business. I think that just to reiterate a point that I've always made about using live samples against real samples is you must use them within the context of it all being a real band and being balanced correctly, which basically means whilst the session cost us £5,000, doesn't mean that it's the loudest thing in the room. And that's what's great about separating tracking engineers from mix engineers, is there doesn't tend to be ego attached to the recording, so that the mix engineers, which in this instance was me, will just bed those live players in. And as I say, it should always be this kind of fine sheen on top of your samples. It should sit above, and that's why you'll see I've done a fair amount of automation just to get to absolutely pinpoint that position. You'll see the minute differences between, say, that being minus 16 dB and that being minus 12, just little alterations. 664, could you slide slightly between these notes? Again, this is when using live musicians is really helpful, because it saves you a whole load of programming time, and that's why I tend to err on the side of trying to get live players in, particularly on inside number 9, because time is tight. This sounds great. So let's have a listen to Tundra. And let's listen to the quartet flautando. So that is... So solo strings. I'm just actually using the violin, but so kind of using it as a quartet patch, if you will. So again, adds in a bit of focus. Now, more focus and more interest with the live players. I think that's a really good mix. I'm not praising myself. They balanced really well there, and it really does trick the ear into thinking that there is a larger section with the principals playing out a bit, but everyone is doing those slides, and I think it's an oral perception thing. Okay, last couple of notes for Ben. 767, there's probably too many notes for the second and viola to handle. These pits harmonies may take the inner and outer voices. So you can see the problem here is I have 5 players and 3, 4, 5, 6 notes. So what I've suggested is that they take the top line and the bottom line. Let's have a little look at what Ben orchestrated. 689. Well, actually what he did is he got them to double stop, which is, so they played all of the notes, which is pretty impressive. Let's just have a listen to them on their own doing that. And also, I didn't get the score up last time for the last bit, so just you can see the end of that, just see how he phrased that. Portamento sempre? I don't really know what that means. Maybe comments down below if you could help. And again, the difficulty of playing double stop pizzicatos, giving them a little bit more extra reach to find, adds, particularly when they really come out there at the end, that bohemian, slightly just on the edge sound, which I really appreciate. Amazing playing by the performers there. Again, sliding between these notes somewhat, but not too much, just to make it more human and a little unsettling. 7-5-5. Let's just have a quick listen. So again, we've got that quartet flautando. It's probably the same kind of part. So again, effects like that, I'll just let the samples do them, sound fine. And let's bring these guys in. Awesome. So again, not many notes for Ben. We have a lingua franca. He really understands my aesthetic, my taste, and I think we share very similar tastes. I think a great example is eerie vibrato. He's also understanding the London players, understand that they will interpret that and come up with a vibrato that is eerie by whatever technique. It's not specifically defined. The mistake I think that we often make, certainly untrained people like myself, these instructions aren't really instructions of how to play. The instructions are really how you want it to turn out. An instruction to make your violin sound like a flute or flautando, the player will know his instrument and know what combination of techniques and styles and dynamics, use of vibrato, positioning of the bow and speed of the bow will ascertain the best flute-like sound on his or her instrument. When saying eerie vibrato, you're saying, I want you to create an eerie effect with vibrato, not this is how you go about doing it. A lot of you are very keen for me to play you QR, which was the climax, which we're about to go into. I think you'll find the difference between the sampled version and the ones with the live players is profound, and they really do earn their crust. But let's get over to some of the questions. Your questions. Any chance to get more info about the mic setup? Looks like Royers on the violins, an 87 on the viola, and a 47 on the cello, and a FET 47 on the bass. I think that is correct. They're all kind of vintage mics, and yes, Royers on the violins, but there's also a stereo Blumlein Royer, a room kind of message that's where the conductor would sit. Now, with a room like that, I think it's unfair to say it's not a great sounding room. It's just not a room that you really want to make much use of. I think that just by adding a little bit of the room signaling, you get a 3D nature of it's not just left and right panning. It just gives you a bit of positioning this way or that way. And once you add your hall reverb that glues the whole thing together, I think that's where the room helps is this kind of pattern here. The reason we use ribbons, valves for close mics is they give you a much rounder sound with beautiful equal harmonics and all of that kind of stuff, as opposed to the slightly more ferocious modern 87s, more modern KM184s. When every second costs money, can you break down a bit what was pre-prepared by the studio in advance and what wasn't? So I sent them these playback WAVs the day before, along with the MIDI file, and they built the single Pro Tools file. Now, if it was going to be a whole bunch of cues on separate Pro Tools files, then I would have built those, or got an assistant to build, or a music editor to build those before going to the studio, because I'm being charged studio time for preparation. All of the mics are set up and scratched, and obviously they do these setups time and time again, so they'll know roughly how to gain stage these things and how to position them. And the picture is imported, the headphones are all set up and plugged in. And whilst they're tuning up, that'll often be an opportunity for the engineer to kind of check the gain staging on all of the mics and the mic pre's. I will usually give him at least 3 or 4, maybe even 5 takes at the beginning to get all of his levels set. So again, the correct gain staging, so you've got enough going to tape without it distorting, without it being too quiet, and to just get a balance that he's happy with in the room before we move those samples up and get the context right. But the musicians, when they sit down, they're reading those parts for the first time. And Max arrived early, and I could see that he immediately jumped in and really started working through some of the fingering because it was really tough. Could you share rough studio rates for a session like this? Good to know that it sounds like 15-minute break is a paid break. Did you say 15 minutes per 3 hours? Yes, and I think it's 10 minutes if you do a 2-hour session. Not all productions will be eligible for a 2-hour session. I did this on a sampling rate, so this is the packed MU agreement, and the sampling rate is top scale, so each of the musicians will be earning between £300 and £400 depending on porterage, which is what they charge to physically transport their instruments. Cellists get more than harmonica players. I imagine that the orchestration probably cost about £1,000. The studio and setup probably cost about £1,500, including Pro Tools hire. That'll include Nick, I believe. No conductor, not expensive there. The first or the leader will often get maybe about £100 more. So I imagine all in, we're coming in just south of the £5,000 mark. Now, why do I do it full scale when it's a low budget TV? Could basically have them on about £60 an hour. What the sampling budget allows me to do is to record more than one episode. I'm basically recording a palette of sounds, of bits of music, whether those be these vignettes we're recording, or later on I'm going to show you what I did with the final 45 minutes of the session and how I populated one of the final episodes of the series with stuff that we recorded at the session without me actually having written the score. This is the beauty of sample sessions, is you can record assets which then can be manipulated, double-tracked, put on a couple of different episodes, even something in the future. These things are always done very much under the goodwill and the understanding of the musicians. I don't think it's ever wise to simply assume things. When you state your intention, I want to book this on a sampling rate, you go, basically, we'll be mainly recording this episode, but also I'm going to grab a couple of bits for this. They'll go into sample instruments. Now, if I'm planning to put some of this out, say for free, with something like Spitfire Audio Labs, then I will probably tell them that up front as far as I can look into the future. It's just a simple case of exploitation. And the best way of describing if you're exploiting someone is if that person leaves a session feeling exploited. If someone is being very well paid for a session fee, then there tends to be a much more relaxed spirit. However, there are certain things that you have to abide by. All of the musicians have to be paid before the session. This stems back from a dark era in filmmaking in the 70s and 80s where limited companies were set up for particular productions, and they would create the content that the studio would then own and get money out of. And often what they would then do is declare bankruptcy for these production companies. So where people would have your standard kind of, 30-day invoice deal for musicians after the sessions, they now have to pay up front. Because of modern online banking and stuff like that, this is a fairly simple task. But even at the beginning of my career, I used to see a trestle table be set up and people were handed the brown envelopes with the cash and the pay slips and all that kind of stuff. Now, if you are planning to film them, again, out of courtesy, MU rules that you're allowed to film up to one session within a day. So you're not allowed to film the whole thing. This is people's image rights. And if you are going to directly monetize the filming of these sessions, then I think that is another. It's almost like, imagine a pit band playing on stage. They're visual performers. So I think, again, you just have to really be courteous and warn people why you're filming it, what you're filming it for. And in this case, I just said this is a great showcase for London musicians. God, it feels like I'm waffling like a lunatic. I'd love to know how you write, sketch such intricate articulations that aren't possible to play with samples. How do you represent them orally in your mock-ups, which you send for the producer, director approval, and how do you experiment how they're going to work during the writing process, considering you don't hear a live player articulate them until the day of recording itself? Thank you. Well, it's a very good question. And the fact of the matter is that, as I've mentioned before, there is a trust between myself and the producers. part of collaboration is the description of what the final result is going to sound like or look like, or, you hear editors or cameramen time and time going, once this is graded, it'll feel a lot darker, there'll be more shadows, we'll bring out this, that and the other. We do exactly the same with music, and I know talking about music's like dancing about architecture can be very, very abstract. Often points of references are very good, so go, okay, well, I'm going to play you Danse Macabre by Sanson. This style of violin technique is what we're after. And then in turn, you can play your soloist. Listen, I played him this recording. Could you interpret these notes in this style is one way to do it. The other thing is there are lots of sample libraries out there, so most articulations have been covered. But there'll be little tricks that I'll use, maybe kind of if you want to imitate little things like if you kind of got a big band playing lots of runs, it's very difficult to imitate the blur of lots of players playing fast notes. So I'll overlay trills and stuff like that. So those are tricks of the trade, but also your ability to communicate what the final thing is going to sound like with producers, but also establishing a working relationship with them. And if you do not have a working relationship with producers, and if you do not feel that they're really kind of understanding what it is you're aiming for, simply invite them to attend the sessions. But beware. What will often happen is for certainly slightly more narcissistic directors and producers, is they will feel very threatened by the use of language, the Italian, this, that, and the other. And what they will do, often, I've experienced it many times with narcissists, is they'll latch on to a concept. I remember once I was doing a romantic rom-com, and there was this kind of scary section, which was a kind of pastiche funny moment. And I said, listen, let's go real full-on Bernard Herrmann, sul ponticello. And the director misheard me and thought I said sul ponticella, and then demanded that the rest of the score be recorded sul ponticella. We ended up only using the samples. Why print 4 bars of everybody resting at the beginning? Did I do that? Yes, and I actually responded in the comments because it sounded like it had annoyed you. And in fact, I just have to remind people that session scoring and concert rehearsals and concert scoring is very, very different. And the reason why you are so explicit on the fact that there are 4 bars and you're starting on bar 5 is you want to reduce the number of hands going up before you start recording. I'm going to say going from bar 3, and the number of times I've had someone saying, we don't have a bar 3. Well, you do, and you're silent. It's midway through this tacit section of 4 bars. So you need to be as explicit as humanly possible. This ties in with another question of why we do not use key signatures, and that is because we need to be explicit with every single incidental. And you'll see, for example, we know we have a key signature with no sharps there. Therefore, the rule should be that you play natural notes at that point. But when you're sight reading, you'll follow that, you'll know that's similar, you'll see that's the same, you will presume that's the same. We're actually explicitly saying, no, we want you to flatten these notes now. So you have to be as explicit as humanly possible. You saying notation is all about clarity and communication. Yes, exactly. It's all about clarity. And if you want someone not to play, you've got to give them a bar for them not to play in. If you want them to play F sharp, you have to write F sharp. You don't get them to look at the beginning of the stave and work out what key they're in. And if you want them to flatten that in the next bar, you tell them to flatten it. If my score is full of additional techniques like this, eerily, vibratos, that kind of stuff, what I'll often do at the beginning is go, listen, there's a lot of interpretive instructions here, which I'm really wanting you to interpret. So let's just play through. Don't ask any questions. Just go with what you feel the orchestrator means here. And then we might give out some specific notes if the interpretation or the end result is not what we had hoped. So again, at the beginning of the session, go, listen, there's lots of notes. Just play what you think we mean. And then if we don't like it, we'll go back. As opposed to, you can often go, right, okay, so when you say this, do you mean this and all of that? So wanting to avoid those kind of questions, because these are all, time is not on our side. I wonder how to write cues like in minute 13 when they're playing effects. Well, I have to say that a lot of our effects libraries at Spitfire and a lot of the effects libraries that are out there, it incorrectly called aleatoric. Aleatoric doesn't mean playing specifically orchestrated effects. What happens is orchestrators have to listen to the demos us media composers are making with these libraries, interpret how on earth the library created those results, and hope for the best. I personally think that a lot of these aleatoric or phrase libraries or atonal additional techniques, avant-garde libraries sound great, and I see it as a bonus if the musicians can bring something more to it. Again, usually it would be just that little level of focus, that little extra sheen. Okay, so a lot of you have asked for QR. I'm going to play it first just with the MIDI, and then let's bring the players in. And I hope you agree with me that the impact of the players is pretty profound. So let's go back here. I'll have a look at a bit of the MIDI with you, and then we'll go back to the players and follow the score. You'll see I lost my way there. That's because I don't read music. I can follow a score, but I'm not really... And again, I always find it's really important for as a composer is to just to listen and look at the picture and see that you're helping to tell the story, because that's what we're there to do, is help tell the story. It's not about all of the notes being perfect and stuff. It's about the emotion, the story that we're trying to convey. So I don't panic about not being able to read music, and I simply don't work with musicians who think that that is an abomination, and some musicians do. There's one more question I think is really important that I'll come to back at the end. There's an extra bit of the session I want to share with you for another episode and show you how I constructed that episode. It won't be as long and as in-depth as this, but it's a curious thing to record some musicians playing music for a score that you haven't yet written. So do stick around for that. Finally, the mix to dubs, and you'll see they're just singles, so basically bounce them all as a single file, which they probably don't like because they don't really get to see where the different cues are. So this is me, again, kind of relying on their good nature and the fact that we work together loads and loads and loads. Full mix, so everything as I intended it. Diegetic phone and music box, which is, there's basically some old-fashioned music being played out of an iPhone, which is quoting my Modular Monday theme. And we've got this music box. I actually really like this theme. This came quite late in the day, and you kind of... There's a regret because you kind of go, I wish I would have quoted that in the main body of the score a little bit more. And played in this old Spitfire Labs music box, which I think was recorded on top of a piano with the pedal down, so it has this amazing resonance. Yeah, percussion and bells are actually, I was wrong, slightly out of tune, vibraphones, and the strings all mixed together in one go. So just 4 stems, including the full mix. One more question about this I want to come back to. I think it's a good one to end on. It's a kind of career-based one. But it didn't end there. We carried on and we recorded some music that I hadn't written yet. Thanks very much, and thanks, Leon, for your contribution. Brilliant. So this next bit, I don't know if you guys are familiar with a piece by a guy called Barry Guy called After the Rain. He has these little, very loose, Baroque, feathered motifs, and that's what I'm trying to basically copy. And exactly. Great, that's us done. Fantastic. Thank you so much. It was a brilliant session.
Have you got everything you need?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. It's brilliant. Thank you. Thanks, man. Excellent, excellent. Really good stuff. Thanks, look, Richard. Brilliant. Lovely to see you all again. Oh, it's brilliant. Awesome work. Thank you, mate. So whilst paying top scale and running scoring sessions like these as actual sample sessions is definitely the most expensive way of doing things, it does offer you all sorts of freedoms, not least if you haven't even scored an episode yet, to be able to get some live assets that are very personal to your production that you haven't started yet. So basically a series of slightly out of phase motifs, and what I've done is trimmed them down and then organized them into duplicates. So basically this C1 here is the original. And then I've got exactly the same duplicated down here, but just so everything is keying to the same pitch, so it's the same root, but because it's an octave lower, and then an octave higher, and then all together. I'm doing all sorts of fun, like playing with delays, pitching it up artificially with that lovely, slightly granular effect you get from AU Pitch, my favourite plugin, and then just bucket loads of reverb. And we're using a Fabfilter Pro R reverbs here, and you can hear, although maybe not particularly sophisticated, a sound of its own. Now, the difficulty with Inside No9 is something we always agreed to do with the scores, was to play the truth of the characters. And the problem with this particular episode is a very familiar genre, and that of a police procedural. And the way it's shot is it's in a car, it's late at night, and it's very, very kind of down the middle. Great dialogue, great use of language, very funny, a bit of tension, procedural stuff of them going to investigate stuff. But in order to play the truth, you have to play it from the kind of the protagonist. And in this case, it is someone who narrates the beginning. It's very kind of very obvious whose story is being told because he narrates the opening of the episode. And in order to play his truth, we kind of have to give away possibly one of the biggest curveballs I've ever been a part of in the history of my TV and film career. It is like it takes the genre and snaps it over your knee. So we were very, very nervous, or rather possibly I was, about giving the game away, because this doesn't play trope of a police procedural. And I think what helped us get away with it was the setting was a graveyard. And I think that possibly the viewer is led to believe that the music is part of the atmosphere of the piece as opposed to part of the experience of one of the policemen. So I'll just play through a few bits of this. I mean, it's funny. It's basically, imagine getting the icing for your cake already made before your cake is baked. But it's important to have the icing nevertheless. Mixture of Evos, very much featured, droney score. Doesn't really sound like a police procedural to me. I don't know how we got away with it. We did. It fooled people. I saw online people just didn't guess it at all. Not a particularly kind of elegant set of ideas, not particularly original set of ideas, but packaged together with unusual use of orchestral samples. I'd like to think it gives it, certainly, maybe it's not massively original, but it certainly has an identity, which I'm very happy with, considering that it is, from a genre point of view, very confusing. So use of the collegno tratto, which is bowing the strings, but not with the hair, with the actual back of the bow, the wood. But that's in Tundra. There's so many players. We'll use some Iceni loops. This is more procedural stuff here. This is my favourite Evo grid. This is one that has just lots of rebowing in it. It's really useful. And the reason it matches the strings so well is it was recorded in the same place, at Adel Studios, with a similar sized band, I guess. Some bass management on the reverb there that I didn't take care of. Whoops. So a hybrid sound I'm very happy to live with. If there's anything to be taken away from my continued experience of doing these kind of scale, the argument for basically spending most of your fee on musicians is not something necessarily that producers expect of me. It's to help tell the stories, to make what I think is some of the best TV I've ever watched. Music that's appropriate to the quality of what's on offer, to match the quality bar, but also to make my job not only easier but possible, and to be able to create deeply atmospheric scores like this, or the Bohemian score of the one before, would be a living nightmare with just samples. And I know at the end of the week I've got some great people to work with, or I know at the beginning of next week I've got some material to make with some great people I've just recorded, just some little ditties. And I can't think back to a time where, even at the very, very beginning of my career, I found a way of working with live musicians. If it was a pal, and I think that something I'm hearing a lot is sonic favours. You're good at the guitar, you need some violin. Violinist comes and plays on your stuff. You owe violinist 2 hours of guitar playing. That's something we can do, this kind of bartering at the early stages. But certainly when it comes to further down the line, I think it's very important to invest in your own music, your own output, but the program itself, and share in the glory, share in the fact that something like Inside Number 9 keeps winning awards and keeps on being recommissioned, even if it is currently on hiatus. If you want to catch Inside Number 9, The Guardian voted it number 2 of the best possible box sets you could watch during lockdown and says it's the best television ever made. I believe it's on Netflix both in the UK and in the United States now. Do look out for it. If you can grab it, I would really say watch it from the beginning, and every single, if one episode isn't to your liking, the next one will be completely different. This one is called Stakeout. The one before was called Misdirection, and those are from season 5. And if you're looking for possibly the greatest piece of television I've ever worked on, but I think the UK has produced in maybe a decade, look out for 12 Days of Christine. It's absolutely, and bring your hankies to that. I'm going to end up on one final question, which I think is a really good one. In terms of starting a portfolio, when I've not yet had my first composing job, at the moment I have nothing to show to people, and I'm keen to work with. So is there a way I can get royalty-free short videos to score just for the portfolio and the practice? Well, I have a bunch of answers for that. If you're looking for work as someone who works to picture, proving that you can work to picture is no longer something that people are wanting to check up on. It's a given. Now, when I started writing music for picture, it was a highly skilled job that required huge amounts of very complicated technology. The reason why I was able to take part in this revolution was thanks to these things, computers. They have made it considerably easy. So people understand now that with digital technology, certainly synchronizing music to picture is relatively simple. And more often than not, you'll give some music to an editor, they'll mess around with it anyway, and they'll be able to kind of edit it to picture. So this kind of, are you good at writing to picture question doesn't raise its head anymore. Having said that, having done a number of competitions with Spitfire Audio, I can see that writing to picture is something that people struggle with. So I would say just grab scenes off anything, really. There's plenty of films, particularly from the 1970s, which are underscored. They don't have much score. I can think like Rollerball is a great example of if you want to practice doing action sequences. None of those have any music on. Grab those and practice. And by all means, I think it's probably quite fun as an exercise to take those and maybe put them on a reel. But as I say, directors will basically accept that you can write to picture, and if you can't, they'll help you with that, they think. But I'll come back to them in a minute. Producers, on the other hand, will want to hire you on the strength of your experience and the proof that you can deliver a score, that you are a reliable head of department, HOD, H-O-D. And unfortunately, the only way of proving yourself as a reliable HOD is to have delivered scores. So I do think working yourself up through the ranks is a very good way of doing things. Certainly student films, really important, and getting into like student documentaries, that kind of stuff. Rising up through the ranks with fellow people of similar ages to you who are making films, that kind of stuff. The more notches on your bedpost, the better you fare for producers. As for presenting a portfolio, the choice usually falls to the director. When it doesn't, will be, okay, no, this is a Vin Diesel film. We've not got someone who's just like 2 years out of Bournemouth Film School is not going to be the head of department for that. There'll be certain things that I've noticed with people hiring people who are less experienced it'll often be the first cut comes through, or first recut rather, and there will often be a tussle at that point of having to basically rescore stuff. The fact that often we will have to provide 3 or 4 entire scores for production can be difficult for people who are starting out. Speed is the key. But the main thing that you're looking for with a portfolio is to create something that stands out. And no matter how interesting your use of orchestration, harmony, after our director hears more than 3 or 4 pieces of orchestral music, it will simply start sounding all the same. It's like, to me, when I listen to opera, it just sounds the same to me. They will not be able to discern between the nuance of what you do. And I think often what you'll find is directors will want to listen to showreels. It'll be something they do at the gym or a walk or on the way to work. It'll be done in downtime. So actually going, I want you to look at my showreel, is probably not something that's going to happen. So all I can urge you to do is to create something that is mind-blowingly original, even if you think it's kind of funny what you're doing. Was it not Cliff Martinez who had a thing of some dogs barking that Steven Soderbergh just admired, didn't want that for his score, but he admired the ideas behind this composer. Alien Isolation was something I pitched for with my brother and his business partner Alexis. And I said to them, I don't want to show them how we're going to do this scene that they'd given to us. I want to show them the power of our imagination. So we invested a lot of time and quite a lot of money in creating something that was simply extraordinary and we knew would be the opposite of what anyone else did. So, in answer to your question, whatever I would do the opposite. I hope that helps. I suspect it probably won't. Thanks, as always, for watching. I'll keep a good eye on the comments down below if you have any further questions. I know that something I didn't mention on the previous one, let's just have a quick look here, was the kind of hall glue reverb that I used to glue it all together. So just have a quick look at that. I imagine that'd be one of the questions that will come up. It's very, very common with orchestral material, even if it's recorded in somewhere reverberant, that you add a kind of Hollywood hall reverb to it. And that's the thing that helps glue everything together. The stuff recorded in a small room, Adel studios, and the stuff recorded in a big studio, for example, Tundra, the sample library I used predominantly for both of these productions, which was recorded in the very reverberant atmosphere of Air Studios. So yeah, so you'll see a lot of stuff sending to bus 1, some more than others, and bus 1 contains the fabulous Fabfilter Pro R. It's Concert Hall Vienna. It's the one I like to use, 2.2 seconds, which is not dissimilar to the large warm hall on the TC 6000. The reason I use the Fabfilter stuff is it's not hardware. It doesn't require a dongle, so I can take it wherever I go because I used to be a travelling composer. Not going to be anymore. Life has changed, courtesy of the lockdown. I think the final point I want to end up on is that all I really teach on this channel or is HOD, head of department stuff. It's craft, the application and use of tools in order to deliver a goal. I can never teach you how to compose, how to find your voice and what that voice should be, or indeed if you know you've ever found it. Was it Oscar Wilde who said, "Be yourself because everyone else is taken"? And in saying that, do take care of yourself. Use this amazing time that we have, lockdown, to gather some tips, tricks, advice, and some ideas of your own. So worth subscribing if you haven't done already. Do ding that bell if you want to be notified the next time I put some videos up. In fact, I've got something coming up soon which gives some really useful career advice. And one of those for those fabulous musicians and the fact they let us film us and watch them struggle with the ridiculous violin parts that I gave them. So thanks as always for watching, and I'll see you again very soon. Bye-bye.